Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Coming to you on day 57 of our response with a message that we continue with our steadfast collaboration and our responsive approach to fighting this virus. You know, we've been watching very closely, along with the entire country and world, really, waiting a vaccine for this virus so that we can start protecting families, friends, neighbors who are vulnerable to this. But until we get to that point, we have to remain extremely diligent right now in taking personal responsibility to protect the health of our families and our neighbors. And we must also continue to strike a balance between the public health of our community, which I think we've done a good job of thus far, and the economic health of our community. And we're taking some steps on both of those fronts this week. So as we've discussed throughout the pandemic, we're following these 3 R's, the R's of reviewing, reassessing, and realigning. And we review information on a very, very regular basis. We reassess what changes we may or may not need to take based on that. And then we realign our mitigation efforts, our response efforts accordingly. And so with that in mind, our council is going to have a meeting on Thursday at 10:30 a.m., not p.m., thankfully, to discuss a new ordinance that would open up some of the restrictions that exist on businesses right now so that they can operate in a much more free fashion, I guess, if you will. That, if passed, would limit the number of patrons in an establishment currently under the no lingering ordinance. So right now, fitness centers, theaters, entertainment venues, they'll be able to expand their occupancy to half of their posted occupancy. Bars, restaurants, coffee shops, those places would be able to open with the only requirement being 6-foot distancing between their seating areas. And so we do expect support from the council on that based on my conversations with them. And again, that would be Thursday. If passed, that would go into effect on Friday. Continued question we get is churches and houses of worship as well. If this does pass, we want to encourage churches to enact those same measures. And so those same measures, those same social distancing mitigation practices, if they decide that they wish to reopen their houses of worship. We know that there's going to be questions on that as we bring this ordinance to a second reading on Thursday. We know that businesses are ready and wanting to scale up and be ready to implement these regulations that are proposed in this ordinance. And so if there's questions on that, please contact our SOAR team, Supporting Operations and Resilience. That's that team at COVID-19 at siouxfalls.org, or by simply calling 211. So I want to look at most recent data that we just compiled today. So right now in Sioux Falls, we have about 870 cases per capita is where we sit right now. And these are again, just for review, this is the 330 or 40 MSAs across the country that the Census Bureau looks at when they look at MSAs. So we still have, a high number of cases in our MSA when you look at the rank, 12th. We've also, as you know, I've been watching Sioux City very closely. Sioux City jumped up to now 1,200 cases per 100,000 residents in their rank. So the reason we watch that is anytime there's hot spots and flare-ups within our region, and when I say region, really the 3-state region, we have to be concerned about that. We have to think about how that could impact our healthcare capacity, potentially. This chart, as we've looked at before, looks at the number of active cases that we have, as well as our hospitalization rate. So you can see in the last week, if we go back to around the 27th, we've seen a slow decline in the number of active cases. And so the active cases take out the number of people who are recovering and the number of new cases, and you can see that's declining. What you'll see when you have that is a slight uptick in your hospitalization rate. So we're now at around 9% in our hospitalization rate. So that is where we sit today in Sioux Falls. Our next scheduled briefing is actually going to be this Friday at 10:30. So that's the next time we'll come to you. We'll have 3 or 4 days worth of data at that point, as well as 2 city council meetings under our belt. So we'll have some good updates for you then. And we'll use this week to, again, track and analyze data points that we're getting on a very regular basis to continue to drive action. So that's what I have for updates for you today. I would certainly take any questions that you may have for me. Right.
I wanted to ask you your opinion on testing. A huge line at Washington High School this morning. Are we doing, I mean, that was for Smithfield employees, but are we doing enough testing in our city?
You know, we get that question about testing, and so the city of Sioux Falls, our testing capacity is limited to, Falls Community Health Clinic and the testing we can do there. The mass testing of the general public as a whole is really something that the State Department of Health manages and oversees. We've come a long way in our testing, but I would really like to see aggressive testing for all first responders, for all healthcare employees, for all critical infrastructure employees, and get to the point where if you want to test, you can drive up and you can get a test. And we're not there yet. And so we continue to have those conversations with the State Department of Health, to ensure that we have easily accessible testing. To say we had 30 cases yesterday-ish is great, but if you only tested 35 people, that really is not great at all. And I'm not saying we test 35, but that's an example of without having aggressive testing, the numbers can be somewhat misleading. So those are conversations we're having. We want to see a lot more testing scaled up. We'd like to see more testing sites that, the Smithfield one that you talked about, or the specimen collection site, we're calling it out at Washington, is for a specific, employer. But we'd like to get to a point where that's more easily accessible to anybody in the public, no matter your employer.
Asymptomatic people, I mean, they could be standing here with no symptoms, and I'm a
Right.
carrier. I mean, anybody could.
Well, there's people who, if they work around high-risk population during the day and they want to know, they can go into work and they can feel comfortable being around that high-risk population, not be a carrier. And so those are the things that are very important. So that's what we're kind of, message we're sharing with the state, that we'd like to see more stand-up testing centers like the one that you're seeing over at Washington.
So just to be clear, the one for Washington is only for Smithfield employees at this point?
Right now it is, for this week. It's going to be stood up for this week. But we'll see how that goes, and we're going to learn a lot from that. Avera is leading that, setting that up. So that site, and I have a note on that here, Avera, State Department of Health, and the CDC have stood that up. And so we'll see how that goes this week. As Smithfield looks to a slow reopening plan, they want to make sure that all their employees have access to testing and have gotten tested if they needed testing.
Can you talk about that slow reopening plan some, and where that plan currently stands? There's supposed to be a partial reopening today, I believe, but what does everything kind of look like moving forward, and what's the city's reaction to how that plan is evolving?
Yeah, the question was about Smithfield and the reopening plan. We spent some time on a call on Saturday with Smithfield and the CDC, USDA, OSHA, Department of Ag, talking about that and talking about their reopen plan. Smithfield wants to ensure that those governmental entities are comfortable with what they're doing in the plant to reopen safely. Obviously, the city and the state do as well. I have a meeting later today with one of the executives at Smithfield over at my office to talk about that and make sure that we're also comfortable with their plan to reopen. And so we realize that, or we understand that they're going to be opening some parts of the plant this week. I, to date, have not seen that. I have not seen any plan or had any conversation on that timeline with them, so I'm looking forward to the meeting that I'll have today to better understand that. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you being here.